Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is a co-hosted webinar brought to you by Dine and Ongage. I'm Danny from Ongage, and with us today is Josh Nason, Email Reputation Manager at Dine. Good afternoon, Josh.
Hey, how you doing, Danny? Good to see you.
Good to see you again, as always. So we got a really cool webinar lined up today for you, and the topic is five ways retailers can improve their email program. Josh is going to be walking us through some really interesting topics that include anything from authentication protocols, setting up your Google Postmaster, interpreting opens and clicks, A/B testing, transactional emails, and much more. So it's going to be interesting. I'm sure you're all going to have some questions. So we will leave some Q&A time at the end. But there's a chat box, there's a designated questions box, so just feel free to post your questions as they arise, and we'll do our best to address them on the fly. And I guess we can get started. So it's over to you, Josh.
Great, thanks, Danny. We'll start in. We'll take my beautiful mug off the camera, and then we will share the presentation. So we go here. Go full screen. Everyone can see that? All right, we're good to go. As you can see, we are, let's see what's going on. Do you see it okay on your screen? Okay, awesome, great. So we'll start. So again, 5 ways that retailers can improve their email program. Again, I'm Josh Nason. We'll get to the intros here in just a minute. Hold on just one second, everyone. For some reason, I cannot seem to advance the slides. All right, let's do this. Yeah, hold on, everyone. I'm just going to pull up the slides real quick. It's having a little technical difficulty. All right, we should be good to. Let's see. Okay, sorry about that. 5 ways that retailers can improve their email program. Even if you're not a retailer, you'll be able to get a lot out of this. But obviously, the idea with this is to have people that are selling things online, but to get the most out of this, or whatever. Again, anyone can really get the most out of this webinar. So a lot of good best practices here. I'll tell you that there is a few technical details in here, but that's okay. The technical details, really, if you're not a technical person listening to this, just somebody just jot them down, get the slides afterwards and everything, and just talk to your tech people and make sure that you're doing some of the things that we're going to discuss today. Safe harbor statement. Safe harbor sounds like a great place to be. Let's go to the agenda now. So we have a few things we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with email authentication. We're going to then transition to Google Postmaster, how to be smarter about opens and clicks, A/B testing, and then the importance of transactional emails. So we're going to hit all of these in varying degrees. And some of these, again, I'm sure you guys have heard about A/B testing before, opens, clicks. I want to try to give a little bit of a different spin on it, and again, hopefully get some good stuff out of this. So who am I? Of course, I'm Josh. You probably knew that already. I've been in the email industry for roughly 11 years. From all angles. So when I say all angles, I mean from currently Oracle Dine, or currently my role now is I work with Oracle Dine, we're a global business unit of Oracle, the Oracle. And really what we do is we're a back SMTP relay in which people can connect to us via a front end that they've built themselves or a partner's front end, and they can actually just deliver emails through us. We send about 50 billion emails a year, billion with a B. And I've also worked on the traditional email service provider end as well, very similar to Ongage, where you can compile lists, manage HTML, and so on and so forth. But I've also worked from probably where a lot of you listening to this right now are. You work with companies, you work with brands, and I've been on that side as well, both from actually working for specific companies, but also working for agencies as well. So my expertise is varied, which I think is good. Again, I'm in email deliverability and reputation management here at Oracle Dyn. So reputation management is an additional service that we offer, essentially a consulting service for some of our major senders if they choose to bring that on board. We do everything from technical and also to the everyday content overviews as well. And again, we think we're one of the best email providers in the world. And I believe sincerely that anyone can be a great email sender if they're willing to work at it. So when people come to us, you go to your different senders, you expect immediate results. It takes time, and you have to be willing to work at it. Things are not going to get better at, say, Gmail overnight if you're having issues there. So just a few things to kind of keep in mind that if you're willing to work at some of these things, you will be able to get better at them. So let's start with number one. We'll start with email authentication. Now, all these are not listed in like importance of what you should do first. I always like to start with email authentication because that's a really good baseline for any good and high-performing email program. So we'll start with SPF Records. So SPF, short for Sender Policy Framework, essentially is a baseline form of email authentication and authorization in a sense that validates a sender. So say company X is authorized to send through a platform like ours. If you use Salesforce, for example, if you use billing statements that send out emails on your company's behalf with your domain to awaiting recipients. So why this is set up and why this is important is, as you can see, receiving mail service, they'll match up that SPF record. So this SPF record you would set up on your DNS portion, on your DNS, you gotta send the text record in. That matches up with the conduit in which you're sending through. So it authorizes that sender's domain to ensure your identity. So what that's saying is, say you bring on a company like Ongage or even Dyn. What that does is prevent someone from saying, a nefarious person to all of a sudden say, I'm going to be sending email from company X instead, even if they don't work with company X. So what that does is authenticates that that company is authorized to send that new conduit. And again, by setting this up, this helps senders avoid mistaken identity, like spoofing, and with major mailbox providers. They like to see that everything's authenticated. That way, they know there's no illegalities happening, no one's hacked into emails or anything along those lines. So a lot of you may be like, of course, SPF, this is easy, this is done. You'd be surprised at people that we run into that don't have SPF records set up correctly. There's a ton of tools out there, free tools. Within seconds, you can find out if your SPF record is set up correctly. You simply put it in your domain, it'll spit the information out, and it actually will tell you if you have some errors along the way too. Perhaps you have too many what they call SPF lookups in your record. If you don't have maybe you have some SPF records in there from very old senders that you used to work with. So it provides you a lot of insight there for free within a matter of seconds that you can use to take actionable items next. Also along those lines is DChem. If you've heard of SPF, you've certainly heard of DChem, short for Domain Keys Identified Mail. It's another form of email authorization that helps the sender, company X, essentially take responsibility for their email in a way that receiving mail servers can interpret. So this is what happens. The sending platform creates a unique hash record that's encrypted by using a private key. The receiving provider then decrypts that key and matches up a public key to validate the email. While that sounds like it may take a long time to do, it's done within milliseconds. Again, if the DChem record is set up correctly, essentially it's just another form of authentication that only the company that's sending would have access to actually set up. It's not like someone could come from the outside and send from your domain if they didn't have this information set up. And again, by setting this up, it takes a few seconds to do. It helps senders validate their email with major mailbox providers. Again, the big two, SPF, DChem, Doesn't cost anything to do. Basically, you're just validating that these two things are set up. With obviously our support team, if people have questions on that, we can answer them rather quickly. Actually, can help guide people along. It is very simple to do. If for some reason that your tech people don't have an idea what that is, and you're sending email through platforms like us or other people, other senders, certainly look that up and get that done immediately. It takes less than 10 minutes total, and will do wonders. We'd love you to get more email to the inbox. I did want to mention DMARC. So DMARC it's something that actually combines both SPF and EChem records. So it's a new type of authentication. Essentially what this does is it tells providers, basically you have 3 different levels in which email that is set up with DMARC you want the receiving mail provider to take. They can either pass the email through to where it's supposed to go, the email can be rejected, or it can stay in what's called a quarantine state. And typically it's kind of like a graduation point where it allows you to say, okay, what conduits are sending email on our behalf? You usually let them all pass to begin with, because what you want them to do is you don't want email that may be coming from, say, a billing agent within your company that may not be set up properly. You don't want that good mail to be rejected. So DMARC, there are companies that provide reporting and allows you to kind of get that insight to where email from your domain is coming from, allows you to make corrections along the way, and then over time, you graduate up to quarantine, which allows, basically just allows a further form of authentication for your email. And the adoption level is only growing with major mailbox providers. I will say with DMARC, there are professional companies out there that actually provide that level of reporting, because it is pretty in-depth. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, just look at the letters DMARC, and you'll be able to get more information about that. So if you learn anything from this first part, SPF, EChem first, and then gradually, especially if you're a bank, an airline, anything that has a very high possibility of phishers or spoofers trying to act as you, I would definitely adopt DMARC. Excuse me. All right, so let's move on to setting up Google Postmaster. And this is always a fun one. And the reason I say that is because Gmail, it's one of those providers that everyone that does bulk mailing, transaction mailing, everyone's trying to send to Gmail addresses, right? It's one of the most popular, if not the most popular, major mailbox provider in the world. They also don't provide a ton of insight when it comes to a lot of Postmaster tools and so on. However, over time, they built up what's called Google Postmaster. So what is it? It is a free tool, which is always good to hear, that gives senders additional insight into your reputation at Gmail. When I say reputation, you can see your sending IP reputation, your domain reputation, TLS, whether or not your email is being authenticated via TLS, and also a few other things as well. So while it doesn't provide every single level of detail, I'm going to show you some screenshots here in a minute, it does provide at least a nice baseline for how your email is performing there over a certain period of time. And it goes out to the past 120 days. So when you set this up, usually it'll show you about a week of data, and then over time it'll again expand out to 120 days. You cannot see placement on here. So placement means you cannot see the estimated percentage of placement that goes to Gmail versus going to the Gmail inbox versus going, say, the spam folder. It doesn't tell you things like, your Gmail is going to this tab, the promotional tab versus the primary tab, and so on and so forth. So really what this is a good overview of how your email is performing at Gmail. And again, it's completely free. So how to set this up? We'll just run through this real quick. Again, go to postmaster.google.com, use a Gmail Google account to actually set things up with. You're going to get a prompt to enter in a domain through which you send email. So many companies have obviously their primary domain, which they send bulk emails through. But they also may have subdomains as well. So for example, they'll do, companyx.com sends bulk email. Newsletters may go through newsletters.companyx.com. You may have transactional email going through transactional.companyx.com. Whatever you have configured there, you're going to want to set up separate entries within that one Google Postmaster record to make sure all those are accounted for. With each of those, you're going to get a text record that you're going to add to your DNS configuration. Again, they do this because you're the only people that are going to have access to your DNS configuration, not some bad guy from the outside. Once set up on there, usually takes a few minutes. You'll be prompted to verify it, and then you're done. And again, rinse and repeat for any other domains and subdomains that you send from, and you'll begin getting that insight for the last 7 days immediately. So I'm going to show you a few of the screenshots of what you'll see if you'll go into that. User-reported spam. So this is good because this will tell you if you had certain spikes on days when a lot of the receiving Gmail users reported your email as spam. This is good to know. So if you're saying that, if you're saying, boy, that my open rate's really not good on a certain stretch, or there may be an issue here, perhaps maybe you tried a different approach with your content, a new campaign, something along those lines, you can actually see perhaps if that affected that. Now, good thing for this user, they would have no user-reported spam there. You can see what it does. It lists day by day here, 0%. If there was a spike or any reason, you would actually just see like a typical graph or a typical chart. You actually just see a spike in activity, and you could actually look down and see what the percentage was there. So you always want to have that at 0, but in certain cases you may influx, and you're going to want to know that. What's good if you do that subdomain approach, because, for example, we have some clients that have had some issues with a welcome stream, and so they do a subdomain, welcome.companyx.com, and the welcome stream, they found because they did not have a traditional double opt-in, they were getting a lot more spam complaints on their welcome stream because of everything wasn't set up correctly. They moved to a traditional double opt-in, then the welcome email, and their spam complaints went down to 0. So it allows you a little bit more insight in how those individual streams are doing. IP reputation. So this is good. All green. This is what you want to see. So this will tell you the IPs that you're sending from to Gmail addresses. This will tell you how those are performing. Note that if you use Google for your company's internal email, your personal correspondence, your company email, this will actually show on here as well, so that's something to keep in mind. And really what happens is you see these 5 different levels: bad, low, medium, and high. You want to be as high as possible, which is always good, and you want to, if you get a little bit of medium, that's okay. You want to avoid bad or low, and especially over long stretches of time. What will happen here is you click within, if you happen to be a bad, low, or medium, you click within, just click the graph. It'll actually show you which IPs are bad as opposed to medium, or which ones have high IP reputation. So it gives you a little bit more insight. It allows you to isolate down if there are certain IPs that are causing problems. Again, more insight than you had before if you didn't have this set up. Domain reputation, very similar here. This gives you the domain reputation for either your main domain, your subdomain, whatever you're sending from in Google Postmaster, and however you have that classed out. We see certain cases where subdomains are ranking a little bit lower than a main domain, a top-level domain. Again, reasons for that, kind of similar to what I explained with the welcome stream. You may have an issue where your welcome email subdomain reputation is a little bit lower than your main domain, and then maybe because of an issue, you don't have that double opt-in set up. Perhaps you have a re-engagement stream that is not performing that well because the engagement levels are so low. Perhaps you have a deal with a partner and you're sending third-party emails via some sort of arrangement that's opted in, and you find that that domain reputation is low. Probably low engagement, perhaps a lot of complaints. Those things can be causing that. So those are a few things to keep in mind. Spam feedback loop. Again, this one is perfect. This is what we want to see. What you don't want to see is what I call the towers. So, for example, if there is a high feedback loop, high amount of complaints, which essentially what this does. So Gmail, kind of take a step back. Gmail, how they do a feedback loop and letting providers like us know if there are complaints, is they don't offer a traditional feedback loop. They offer Google Postmaster. So when we get, when there's complaints, they will get logged here, and if there's a specific spikes, 0.5%, something along those lines, you can see 0.1 at times, they will show up on here, and that's basically saying that the amount of people that complained was enough to register with Google, and that is often an issue with reputation. Now, you can certainly work around these type of things, But that's just something to kind of keep in mind. We've also seen a red tower, essentially, like a bar graph here. That's not good. You click that, you can see the percentage. That allows you to go back on that day, the day before, give or take, and look and say, okay, what did we do here? Was there a campaign that went out that we accidentally sent out to people that had opted out? Was there some sort of technical error internally? Anything along those lines, this will actually tell you what's going on. So again, if you have a great sending program, this will always be at 0. If you do have some, that's okay. What you don't want to have is repeated towers day after day, week after week, because that indicates a much worse issue with your Gmail performance. Authenticated traffic, this will show the DKIM rates, SPF success rate, and DMARC success rate. As you can see, there's a little bit of a drop off here for this sender on the 25th through the 26th. That could have been due to some sort of internal issue, but again, allows you more insight to look and see where there might be some sort of problem with SPF or DKIM failing. Sometimes this will happen often when a technical person will make an update and will perhaps remove a record, or maybe someone new that just has to be doing something that they forgot about, some sort of error, and usually it's pretty easily resolved. So again, it allows you more insight into that performance. Encrypted traffic, again, inbound TLS, outbound TLS. I won't spend too much time on this, but again, it gives you the insight there if your email is being encrypted on the way out and on the way in. And delivery errors. So this would be a case where, again, most of the time it should be 0. If you see a spike in delivery errors on this chart, it'll give you a reason. Oftentimes there'll be some sort of a temporary authentication failure on Gmail's behalf. Perhaps there was an influx of spam, and the email that they're getting from you is being complained about, and it's hitting the spam folder rate as such, where they're just like, okay, no more of this email is going through. That's for the really bad senders. We've seen that a couple times along in the past few years. It's very, very rare, and usually there's some sort of a major issue there that helps answer that. So delivery errors, again, should be all 0s there. And that wraps up Google Postmaster. So again, free tool, more insight than you have if you don't have it set up, especially if you're sending to a lot of Gmail users. I would highly recommend it. Let's move on to next topic, which is how to be smarter about opens and clicks. And clicks, we get questions all the time. What's a great open rate? And perhaps we'll talk about that later. But there's always ways to be smarter about doing it. Obviously, you want more opens and clicks. So we'll go through a few bullet points here, and I'll kind of get into it a little bit. So this is something I always tell our clients and anyone we talk to this stuff about is don't focus solely on the open percentage of your campaigns or your overall accounts. Focus on your aggregate totals as well. And here's why I say that. So we go to the next slide here. So as you can see, this kind of gives an idea of a week-to-week basis. And obviously, if you're not doing something like this, like tracking things week to week, I'd highly recommend that as well. What this does is this always gives you the ability to go back and say, okay, how did we perform this week to this week to this week, both consecutive weeks and also maybe year to year. If you saw low performance, if you track email revenue, perhaps there's some sort of issues along the way there. It allows you to go back and say, okay, there are open rates drop off, there are send volume drop offs. I would always, so if I just looked at open rate, I'm like, okay, great. Or for a 4-week stretch, we've gone from 17% to 23%. Awesome. But you want to look at the send volume. Did the send volume change at all? And granted that the send volume went up a little bit, but not that much. But I always like to look at that aggregate number and say, okay, we're having more people open up the email, but what does more people look like? Is it content, maybe some content change we made where more people are opening up? This is total opens and not unique opens. So I look at over a 4-week stretch, we had 178,000 opens on this first week, and then just a few weeks later, we had 239,000 opens. It's been a steady increase there over 4 weeks. So that's a really good jump. What I like to know is, okay, what changes did we make? Was it engagement? Was it, again, some sort of content change, subject line change, something along those lines? Because something really positive is happening here over that 4-week stretch, and that's what I like to know about. We go to this example below. Again, we see a pretty meager we see a little bit of a jump here. Obviously, 14s, then jumps to 16, great. And look at the send volume, and the send volume stayed pretty consistent, so that's good. And looking over this 4-week stretch, I mean, there's essentially been 100,000 open increase, which is awesome. So again, knowing that 100,000 more people or total opens or whatever, people going back to email over and over again, that's stuff I like to know about. So percentages are good, but really, let's look at the aggregates as well. Same thing goes with clicks, and obviously we don't click numbers really on here with zeros, of course, here, but same thing. Percentages are nice, but also look at the aggregates. That way you can be like, a lot more people seem to be opening this. Why is that? You can answer those questions and then try to replicate that across either new campaigns or different email programs you have internally. Number 2, dead weight from your list. So I'm a big advocate of unengagement programs and removing re-engagement programs or removing unengaged users after a certain amount of time. So what's an unengaged user? Unengaged user is someone that has not opened up your email based on whatever time criteria that you give. So for example, you have someone hasn't opened up an email in more than a year from you. I would say that to you, that's an unengaged user. The last time they opened up is 1 year ago. Some people like to have that engagement off maybe 6 months away. Some people like to do 3 months. Some people like to do even shorter, like 1 month. What you don't want to do is go past 2 years. So we'll get to a few kind of bullet points about that. The reason that unengagement and re-engagement campaigns are so important is major mailbox providers like Gmail, they place a premium, and Hotmail obviously, place a premium on engagement. They like to see people opening and clicking your emails. And over time, they track that. They understand that when a campaign from company X comes in, typically they see a lot of opens, and that email will go through the inbox more than campaigns that are not being opened up that much. And it's also unique on the user. You can have 4 people in a row, all signed up on the same list, all from Gmail. And I open up the email every single day. My cohort opens up the email 3 times a week. And the 2 other people open up the email maybe once a month. And then maybe another person opens up the email once a year or never. Where that email goes will all, as far as the inbox versus spam folder, it will be different for each of us based on those engagement levels. So that's something to kind of keep in mind there. Subject line's important, but also the people clicking the emails and being involved are important as well. So finding that sweet spot of where your emails, where people drop off is so key. So again, the more engaging the emails, the better reputation you have, and the more email that gets into the inbox. Don't focus on the overall number of the list that you have. And this is something I've talked about in other webinars before, is you could say, 1 million people are on your list. Great. If 750,000 of those people haven't opened up in more than, say, 18 months, what good are those people? There's something that clearly is not working there. So that's something to kind of keep in mind is if somebody hasn't opened an email from you in more than a year, what message does that send you internally? Do you have the type of business where people really only engage once every 8 months, maybe a year? It could be some sort of like annual type of checkup or something along those lines. We had a client that deals in medicine, online meds, and pet medicine specifically. And they said, yeah, typically we do our unengagement cutoff at 13 to 14 months because people check in with us once a year because they have to get yearly prescriptions filled for their pets. To me, that made sense. So everyone's going to be a little bit unique. I would definitely not send any data that hasn't opened up from you in more than 2 years. What happens over time is that email will, certain providers will make some of those emails spam traps because they're trying to really get people to clean up their list, especially if you're saying the list of some people will tend to send emails like every single email they have. Maybe a coworker finds an Excel sheet somewhere in a drive from their folder, and they're like, oh, I forgot about these people. You don't want to send to those people if they haven't engaged with you in quite some time. So something to keep in mind. There's a price to pay for sending to old data. You run those risks of spam traps. You run those risks of hitting blacklists. You run those risks of getting to the spam folder because you're simply just sending so much, and a lot of those people may not be opening up. So I would definitely look at your engagement strategies and look for ways that with offers, especially in the retail space. Figure out ways that you can set up a re-engagement program where, I'll give you an example. So say that you are going to, all people that have not opened up from you in more than 1 year are going to go to a separate program. They're not going to get your regular newsletter because they're not opening it. You give them a great offer, and you give them a great offer, say 40% to any offer, any item in the store, with just using a specific coupon code. The people open up that email. Those people go back in your general pool because they're engaged with something. You get them back in the mix. You make some money. You're good. People that haven't opened up that first email, you send them a second email 3 days later. And you say, hey, you might have missed this. We're offering you 40% off. You had a limited amount of time in order to get this. Then you send a final third campaign a few days later to the people that have not opened up either of those first two campaigns. And those people, you basically say, we haven't heard from you, or you haven't opened an email from us in more than a year. We're going to unsubscribe you unless you click this link. And that's just like a reaffirmation or something along those lines. So just something to kind of keep in mind is that anyone, especially in the retail space, we have the ability to do offers. That's really important. So again, place the premium on engagement. Don't get caught up in that you have a big list. Don't worry about that. Worry about how much of that list is opening. And again, going back to the aggregate numbers, track it over time, and keep those things in mind. Great reputation comes from the highly engaged emails. More email gets the inbox, more revenue. And again, there's a price to pay for saying to old data. Something to keep in mind. Set up weekly benchmarks and track them. I talked about this again with those charts a few slides ago. And again, that's really it. So again, don't gauge success slowly in your percentages, but also your aggregate totals. Cut that dead weight from your list, and then set up those weekly benchmarks and track them. Sometimes this may seem like a lot of work. If you have someone that's overseeing your email program, I'm sure a lot of you are, find some time to do it, get some help. And even with the weekly benchmark, start slow and then build from there. You're not talking about charts upon charts upon charts. Do something just simple like I set up a few slides ago with the week by week, and that'll do a lot for you. And even things like your bounces and things along those lines too. We'll go to A/B testing. We'll spend just a couple minutes on this. And I'm sure you guys have, plenty of you have heard about A/B testing. I mean, this is no breakthrough new topic I'm talking about here, but quite simply do it. There's so many retail senders that we see on a daily basis that they just don't do A/B testing, and I'm really not sure why. Especially if you're trying to sell more product and get more engagement in your emails. All you have to do is simply start simple. Take your campaign, split your campaign, your list in two, and most automated solutions do this. I know Ongage does this. So you simply split it in two. You start with just change the subject line. Say, okay, we're debating between two subject lines, and we're sending this out to our main list and trying to generate some revenue and see if one makes a difference over the other. And then you just send it, you do it, and you look at the results. You see how many more people opened up with subject line A versus B. And over time, try a different element. So again, you only want to change one element at a time. So you don't want to change the subject line, change the main image when people open up the email, change the color of the button, anything like that. What you want to do is change one element, see what works, learn from it, and then evolve into another one. So, especially if you find that you have two subject lines repeatedly and you're just like, I can't decide between either, this happens every time, do an A/B test and try it out. And then over time, try a different image. Maybe you have two different products and your list isn't really culled down to maybe more niche type of list management where you're sending people that just want specific items and are subscribing to that subset. You may do we're going to say you did outdoor wear. You may focus one time on tents and maybe another one on like outerwear or something like that, and see if people engage with it, click more on the first one as opposed to the second one, and so on and so forth. So, and then if you get really good, do an ABC test, and you can do an ABD test if you want to. I mean, depending on the time you have and the capabilities you have, the ability to do different tests is unlimited. What you don't want to do is so many tests that you're really just kind of not getting the information you want out. So I would always say A/B test to start with. Start simple, build from there, and obviously identify what the goal is as well. Do you want more opens? Do you want more clicks, and that's what you're looking to A/B test with. But quite simply, just start doing it. And finally, one of my favorite topics, the importance of transactional email, especially in a space like retail. So with retail, transactional email, of course, we define it as one-to-one email. There is bulk email is one-to-many. Transactional email is one-to-one. It's email that is sent based on a transaction. It could be someone bought something. It could be a password change. It could be a shipping notification. It's the boring email that you send that everyone complains when they don't get it. They just want to expect it, essentially get that receipt, and then they want to move on with their day. As you guys know, what happens when people don't get their transactional email is they reach your support teams, they ask questions, and that takes up your support team's problems, the support team's times. That creates other problems because other people are waiting in the queue, and you've wasted a lot of time for something that should be just firing out and should be a set and forget type of email when it comes to functionality. It is the most important email that you send because of that. It is also the most open type of email that you send. I'm surprised a lot of centers that we have don't really look at their opens when it comes to transactional rates, which is surprising because typically your open rates for transactional email are going to be 80, 90, 100%. For airlines, they're usually 120% because people are consistently opening up their itineraries and so on. So you want to be able to see that because you want to be able to see are people opening up these emails. If they're not, then that's a huge red flag. We had someone we were talking to a few weeks ago. They were mentioning they had a transactional email that was getting an 11% open rate, and that was a huge red flag. So we're working with that center to try to figure out what is the problem along the way. Turns out they're using essentially what's called a transactional triggered email, which is more of a marketing automation tool. But that obviously can affect how they send and the cadence in which they send and so on. But typically your traditional transactional mail should be getting a huge open rate. And again, it's also the most overlooked type of email that you send because people just, like I mentioned before, they set it and forget it. They often just set it and forget it. They don't think of, okay, does the subject line still work 3 years after we set this up? Is the messaging right? Is the company, like all these type of things, people don't just kind of set it, forget it. They don't ever look at. So I'd always recommend looking at least once a year, if not more than that, to see if there's improvements that you can make. And what I say is follow Amazon's lead for how to sell without selling. And I say that because I recently, as many people do, bought stuff from Amazon, and they send this nice. This is a arrival notification here of when our package is going to get here. So you see I bought a slide for my daughter, and it's very simple. It says what day it's supposed to arrive. I can track it, verifies where I'm shipping it to, what's on the way. But I like what they really did is in the bottom here, give the shipment total. There's, almost text, but just two little images on what people that bought the item that I bought, what else they also bought. And again, very simple, gives the price. It shows it's available via Prime. So I can easily click in there and be like, okay, maybe I want to buy her a basketball hoop, or maybe, my wife and I have been talking about a rocking horse, and we want to do the same thing. It's not in your face glaring like most promotional copy is and most images are when it comes to a lot of this. So, but what it does is it's a little thing where just in case people click on this, it's increased revenue, increased exposure. What I hope they do, what I'm assuming that Amazon does, is they track the revenue and they track the click rate from transactional email and see how it's performing. And then they can make tweaks along the way. Obviously, this is an automated pull from their database. Customer bought this, put these two items in, but it's added revenue. I'd be dying to know from Amazon how much revenue their transactional email pulls in. However, anyone can do this. If you're selling right now, you can do something similar to this. You just have to make it subtle and not get in people's faces when it comes to in front of the information that they're really looking to get. We're at the end here. So final takeaways. Make sure your email authentication is set. I talked about SPF. I talked about EChem. Look into DMARC. Make sure those things are set. Again, if you're not the technical person, talk to the people that handle your DNS records and ask if SPF and EChem is all set for whatever conduit you're sending email through, be it a company like Ongage, a company like us, Anyone you send email through, again, Salesforce, Zendesk that does support anything that sends email on behalf of your company, make sure that authentication is set. Set up Google Postmaster, set it up for any domains and subdomains that you send through. It's free. Track your opens and clicks over time and focus and don't just focus on the percentage, focus on the aggregate numbers as well. Do some form of A/B testing, even if it's just subject lines, especially if you're selling, you owe it to yourself and your company to do that. And review your transactional email program. I guarantee you guys are missing revenue, leaving revenue on the table, more exposure for your websites simply by not doing anything with that transactional email. There's a way to do it, and also look at how many people are opening up your email. And if you do set something up like Amazon did, look how many people are clicking and available and be interested rather to make changes on the fly and go. And do reminders of yourself in your calendar every quarter to review your transactional campaigns from a holistic standpoint to see how they're performing. We're at the end, and we're going to open it up for some questions here. So I'm going to go back to the slides. All right. Let's see what you guys have for questions. All right. First off, so I have a question here. What do you, I talked about this earlier. What do you consider a good open rate? So that's a great question. Something we get asked quite a bit. I consider a good open rate to be something, in aggregate opens, to be something better than what you did before. What I like to see is over time an increase, obviously in both percentage and aggregates. So, I mean, depending on the type of campaigns that you send, it's tough to say. I mean, obviously with transactional email, if you're not getting an 85% or more open rate, something's wrong with your transactional mail. I look at that immediately. With retail, it depends on the cadence. It depends on what time of day you send. It's all these type of things. So I would say look to beat what you did the week before, the day before, the month before, even the year before, and see what your trends are over time. The idea is that's another good reason you should remove unengaged users from your lists, because you get a more realistic understanding of how your campaigns are doing. And if you're sending this big list, and again, we use the million example, 750,000 people aren't opening up consistently, then you want to focus on that 250,000 that are, and maybe engage this more and what is best for them. In Google Postmaster, what is the most important thing to look at? I always start with the reputation stuff. So IP reputation, I would start with, and then go to obviously the spam feedback loop, and then domain reputation. Those are three that I really like and kind of look at the most. So I would focus on those and see, again, looking over time, is it correlating with any issues you might be having or so on. But again, the hope is that your IP reputation is high, domain reputation is high, and everything else is low. That's really what you're looking at there. Where should I start with A/B test? Very similar to what I said. Make it simple. Do subject lines first, and then if you have a easily replaceable, say you have a lead image in your retail emails, you want to be able to look at those and maybe swap those out. You could be debating between two different images. There's a good chance the subject line, different offers at the top especially. So something that you really just want to compare and you're like, I don't know how this is going to perform. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind there. We'll go to some of the other questions there too. Let's see. How do you set up your feedback ID header for Google Postmaster? Is there a format that needs to be followed? That is a good question. So with your feedback header, if I'm remembering this right, it's automatically generated from wherever you're sending your email from, if that makes sense. So you should be able to tie it back to if you're sending via, like, say, us versus like your internal email with Google, for example. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Their support is really good for questions about Postmaster as well. So I would follow up with them, but again, just set it up on the domains and subdomains. And for the most part, if you're sending it through to Gmail addresses just from like a conduit like Ongage or us or combination, whatever you want to have there, your feedback ID should just be from that. If you're doing it from your company as well, you should be able to find that out pretty easily. If you're saying that more, you just want to have some sort of keep track of that somewhere. But that's a good question. Let's see what we got. So how does Yahoo email engagement work? It has different criteria to treat the mails, cover marketers, and there's no promotion tab. I think the question here is basically how does Yahoo look at engagement? They obviously are high as well. They're going through a lot of changes, as probably most people know, with essentially behind the scenes combining their infrastructure with Yahoo and AOL. So obviously Yahoo and AOL are existing on their own, but they're doing this whole oath thing as well. So high engagement is good for really any type of sender, any type of mailbox provider. So if you're finding that you're having issues with Yahoo, they do provide some good Postmaster tools, different than what Google provides, but they also provide a way to like apply for whitelisting, ask some additional questions, and so on. So while there's no promotion tab and things like that, treat it the same way. You're looking to get highly engaged email to the inbox, and the lower the engagement, the bigger chance it's going to go to spam. Let's see, what can we do when Google Postmaster shows our IP and domain reputation as bad? So that's a good question. You want to go back. You want to figure out, one, how long that's been going, right? So you want to figure out, is it a one-day spike, a one-week issue, so on and so forth, or is it continued? If it's continued, it is most likely due to you're simply sending to Gmail addresses that don't want to get your email. People that haven't opened up email in a long time. We go back to the whole engagement discussion as well, right? So your IPs, your domain reputation will kind of start there. So that just means that something is wrong. These are things that you can rehab them, but it takes a while to do that. It really, again, comes down to that fundamental of sending email that people want to open and people want to engage with. That is the main key with everything. And if you do that over time, you can rehab both the domain and the IP reputation. So the IP reputation can be a different issue. If you're sending through a provider and you're sending in a shared IP pool, there may be some issue with some of the other senders in the IP pool. I will tell you that from our perspective, obviously we have different shared IP pools, and we vet pretty heavily with people coming on the network. Occasionally there may be some issues, but usually nothing that would cause IP reputations to go bad. So I would ask about your internal, whoever you're sending email through. If you're sending off shared IPs, perhaps dedicated IPs, there may be some issues there as well. So I would talk to whoever manages that for your different email service providers and get the information there as far as how the IPs are doing. If it's dedicated IPs, it goes back to there's issues with your email programs. So you can rehab those over time. You got to start with sending really good email. Let's see, transactional emails. Doing some reading recently. Says that Gmail automatically or should automatically mark your transactional emails as important. Is there much truth that you know of? Not necessarily important. I mean, they'll put those in the what is the name of the tab? Updates tab traditionally. Sometimes if you drag and drop that stuff over the primary, like I do that, like my credit card payment reminders, those are transactional emails. I will actually mark those as I'll drag those to primary, so it always goes there all together. But typically, because they're text only format and what they are, those will go to the updates tab. So I mean, you can mark those as important. Basically, any criteria within your Gmail box in which you are managing and saying this stuff is important. These are whitelisted senders, things like that. Those are going to go to the top of that list. So that's just something to kind of note there. Kind of going in really quick, talking about the difference between the primary tab in Gmail versus promotions and all that stuff. You really can't game the system to get to primary. Primary is typically for personal correspondence and stuff that you've identified that you want to receive in your primary. The best way to do that is do a campaign out to your people and say, if you want to make sure you never miss an email, something along those lines, and just simply give them screenshots how to drag and drop to primary. That's the easiest way to do it. What if A/B testing doesn't work properly? I would talk with your front-end provider as far as what the issue might be. that's definitely a front end issue, but it should work properly in terms of you being able to split a list, send, and make those changes there. So talk with your front end provider if for some reason it's not, and figure figure out what's going on there. What happens if others are sending against the same IP and it develops a bad reputation? They reset reputation. They don't necessarily reset reputation. They look for consistency, right? So you want to kind of, you can't go back in time to fix this. You want to start right from when you can start from. So with the shared IP range, again, with your provider should be able to have a conversation as far as like your shared IPs, and usually there's, like with our teams, there are certain times where we will change a customer's shared IP pool because their email is high performing, and when they first came on, we really weren't sure. There were some questions. They were looking to rehab some things a bit, and eventually over time they moved to a better pool. So Google doesn't necessarily do a reputation reset like some other, like maybe a Yahoo or some other providers do, depending on the sender. So usually what happens is if your domain reputation is really high and your IP rep is low, something's going on with the IP, so I would focus on that. And again, there's always ways to rehab and recover. You have to really start saying the good stuff first. Let's see. I think that is all. I think that's all the questions here. Actually, oh, sorry, I got one more here. Can you still achieve deliverability in 2018 beyond SPF? Not really. I mean, I'm sure there are some cases in which you can, but SPF is such. It's, again, you kind of going back to the core of what it is. It's saying that this conduit is allowed to send email on my company's behalf. So if that's not set up, it's so easy to do that providers often will ding that, especially maybe some smaller providers, because it's just a quick check for them to do. If for some reason it's not set up, it's kind of a question as to why, right? So we always would recommend that, and we can't guarantee results in any cases, but you're certainly not starting off on a good foot if you don't have SPF or even DKIM set up right from the start. We always recommend. Well, good. I think that's all the questions we have. Obviously, there's other ways to ask us questions along the way, and so on. So, Danny, I will bring you back into this to wrap things up. And obviously, you can email me. My email address isn't on here. It's josh.nason@oracle.com, and you can engage with me there. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
All right, cool. Thank you very much, Josh. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Hopefully you found it useful. And in case anybody does have any questions about the topics we discussed, or you want to hear a bit more about the Dyn services or the Ongage services, you got our details right in front of you. And also we'll be sending a follow-up mail with a recording of this webinar, so feel free to share it. So thanks again, and everybody have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.